Welcome everyone. You're listening to the ICA India podcast. Through the podcast series, we hope to bring out multidisciplinary dialogues by discussing the intersections of economics, policy, and cancer. Hello everyone. I'm Ojasvi Ghai from the India ICA team. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting Dr. Prasad with us. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you, Ojasvi. A real pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Would you like to start off with introducing yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Ojasvi. My name is Dr. Ramakrishna Prasad. I am a board-certified family medicine physician. In terms of my background, I went to medical college in India, and then subsequently I trained in public health and have a master's in public health with a focus on infectious diseases and microbiology. I also did my residency training in family medicine in a global health track at the University of Pittsburgh. I followed that up with fellowships in faculty development in HIV/AIDS and served as a faculty member in the Department of Family Medicine, Infectious Diseases, and at the School of Public Health at the University of Pittsburgh. For the last few years, I've been working in India. Here, I serve as the founder and director of PCMH Restore Health, which stands for Patient Centered Medical Home Restore Health. I also serve as the chair for the AFPI, which is the Academy of Family Physicians of India, National Center for Primary Care Research and Policy, and as the vice president for AFPI, Karnataka State Chapter. My pleasure to be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. I'm glad to hear this. So, you work not just in India, but we're aware that you've had experiences in Africa and other countries as well. So, shall we start with you talking about your varied experiences and how the context of primary care is different in Africa and as opposed to India or other countries in the global context?
Sure. Privilege of experiencing and learning about health systems and also being part of care teams in several parts of the world. Of course, most of my experience has been from India and the United States, where I spent and have practiced for a long time. In Africa, I have a fair amount of experience from Mozambique, which is in southern Africa. I used to be a preceptor or a mentor to young faculty and medical students and young doctors at the Catholic University of Mozambique. So I have some experience there. And in the more recent past, in the last 3-4 years, I've gained some experience of the contexts in East Africa, particularly Kenya. That's something I'll bring to the conversation. During my residency training days, more than a decade back, I was working in a mountain village in Honduras, in Central America, and actually had longitudinal contact with that community and would spend a month every year during 3 years of my residency. So have seen some of these issues there as well. Other than that, I used to work in the island nation of Grenada, which is in the West Indies, as a primary care physician, but mostly as a tutor in pathology and microbiology about 15 years back. There was a time there when there was a Hurricane Ivan. So saw some of these issues play out there as well. Those are some of the experiences and contexts I perhaps can share over the course of our podcast today, in addition to the primary experience in the US and India. Let me just take a moment to say what being a family doctor or a primary care physician means. Family medicine is a branch or a specialty within medicine where the focus is to look at individual people or persons as a whole. It's also a specialty which focuses on the entire family unit. Being a family doctor typically means being wedded to a few principles of primary healthcare, which are namely that there is a long-standing and trust-filled relationship between a patient or a family and an individual doctor and his or her team. This relationship affords the opportunity to provide continuous care or continuity of care within the doctor-patient relationship. Additionally, it's an opportunity for the patient or the family and the doctor to engage in comprehensive care. There is no topic or concern or symptom or finding which is outside the purview of this primary doctor-patient relationship. There could be, for example, someone whose grandmother was diagnosed with cancer, and it might be playing on this person's mind as to whether they are at risk of developing that cancer. This is a very common conversation which happens in family medicine between a family doctor and patient. Being a primary care physician or a family physician also means a commitment to providing comprehensive care, that is preventive, health promotive, curative, rehabilitative, and palliative care. Additionally, there is no separation of someone's mental health, physical health, social determinants of health, and on occasion, even spiritual aspects of health. It is the responsibility of a family doctor to also coordinate and help patients navigate, coordinate care and help them navigate very complex and often very fragmented healthcare systems. And I will, over the course of our conversation, share some examples, real examples of patients and their stories where coordination, etc., has been challenging. There is a commitment to provide contextual care. That is, each individual and each family lives within a certain context. That context is cultural, that context is social, economic, political, within a health system, etc. So to be aware of this, to help navigate this, to be respectful of this, and to function in a way that families are able to find the solutions being offered palatable to them, acceptable to them, is one of the core commitments of being a family doctor. Finally, a family physician and his or her team should be available at the point of first contact. So no matter what someone might have, whether they have a headache or they're feeling low or they're having diarrhea or muscle pain, or they've had a screening test which has come back to be suspicious for cancer, a family doctor is typically the first contact. This is actually the core of my daily work as a doctor. And you will see that many of the stories I bring, and yes, definitely cancer, concerns for cancer, arranging for screening for cancer, following up on screening results, discussion and counseling families and patients about the likelihood of cancer. And if any abnormal result is found, then coordinating care, including appropriate referral, further testing or diagnostics, and a referral, if need be, in the case of confirmed cancer, with specialists or specialty services, and providing palliative care throughout the process is very much a part of my daily work and also the daily work I'm involved in through my team.
The health systems in India, it is very important to have screening tests and look out for prevention techniques as well. And as you pointed out, how people might just think that they might have cancer and they would just want to have a discussion. So could you tell us a bit about prevention and screening and how important is it?
Sure. Cancer across the world, but definitely in India and other parts of Africa. In fact, I'd recently been to Nairobi a couple of years back, and the cab driver, he asked me if I was from India. I said, yes, I'm from India. And the first thing he told me was that his mother had actually come to India to receive cancer care. Cancer is definitely is a growing burden, significant burden, and significant problem across the world. I will do this by taking a couple of stories, and I'll take stories from three contexts. The first context I will take is a story from actually my practice from last week. So a 50-year-old woman who is very educated and is in a senior administrative position had contacted me. She had come in to see me for a wellness visit. Doesn't have too many problems, is under a fair amount of stress, but because she was past 50, wanted to make sure that we were keeping watch on various parameters linked with her health. As a family doctor, I asked her for her family history. And one of the things that came out was that her mother had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer when her mother was in her 50s. And her mother had died because of ovarian cancer and its spread in her 50s. So this was something which definitely weighed on my patient's mind. So we had spoken about the various forms of cancer screening that are evidence-based and recommended for someone her age. We discussed breast cancer screening. We spoke about cervical cancer screening. We spoke about the linkage many times between breast cancer and ovarian cancer. We also spoke about colon cancer screening. Part of the conversation was, what does screening entail? How accurate is screening? Where can it be availed? How much does it cost? How convenient is the process? Is the screening process painful? And what would be the next steps in case something was found on screening? And what could be some potential and perhaps unintended harms? For example, a screening test is done on someone who's otherwise feeling healthy. They don't come to you with symptoms and you're not looking to make a diagnosis. You're simply doing a test in someone who's otherwise asymptomatic and feeling healthy to look for a possible lesion or possible finding. Problems with any screening process is there can be false positive findings. False positive findings, such as, for example, in breast cancer screening, say there is a woman, she undergoes a mammogram and a lump or nodule or something like that is seen. And the mammogram is, say, unable to determine whether that is a cancerous process or a benign process. To determine that, oftentimes a second test, which may include an invasive test, such as FNAC, which is fine needle aspiration cytology, or a biopsy may be required. And the biopsy or the FNAC may come back with reassuring results. They may not show any cancerous cells. But there is often a psychological burden, a stress, a financial burden, a cost in terms of convenience and having to navigate very fragmented healthcare system and often an impersonal healthcare system, plus the burden of, say, an unnecessary procedure, which may leave behind a scar, which may leave behind. That's a snippet of a conversation from one of the patients I saw in my practice last week. I'll take the example of someone in a rural area. We had conducted a training. My colleagues, Dr. Ashujit Kauranand, who's a palliative care and primary care physician, community health physician. She and another colleague, Dr. Varsha Sridhar, had recently conducted a training session for ASHA workers who work as a part of an organization. So a few stories came up. One of the stories was stories around cervical cancer screening. As we know, in India, and in many other parts of the world, cervical cancer, which women experience, is a very significant cause for death. While almost for 100 years, we've had a method of screening, pap smear screening. The problem is it's not very easy to access this. So I'll give you a snippet of a conversation. The ASHA worker had been trained to discuss various forms of cancer screening with families, especially women. She brought up the need for cervical cancer screening. The woman in this village who lives in a small village, she's part of a family of 6 in that village. They have a small house, they have a few farm animals as well. But the woman said, I feel shy. Where can I get this done? You, as a woman, the ASHA worker was a woman, can you do this for me? The ASHA worker said, no, I won't be able to do it for you, but I'll refer you to the primary health center close by. The primary health center has a male physician. And the woman was hesitant to have a pelvic examination, which involves examination of the genital area, by a male doctor, especially when she was not having any symptoms. So she said, no, I don't want. The ASHA encouraged her. She said, no, please talk to your family, talk to your husband, talk to your mother-in-law. Please tell them that this is good for your health. You have growing children. You don't want to become sick. So the woman eventually, after a month or so, after a lot of encouragement, did speak to her family, and her family was supportive. They wanted to know more details, and they said, okay. So they went to the doctor at the primary health center. The doctor at the primary health center spoke to the family, but said that they at that primary health center did not have the facility to do a pap smear, transport the cells or the smear in a timely manner to a recognized or trustworthy pathology lab, and then receive the results and follow up. As a result, he said that the best thing for them to do would be to go to one of the large hospitals in Bangalore city, government hospitals. For this family, that ended the conversation because the woman said, A, I feel shy. This is not something I feel comfortable talking to just anyone about. Number two, if it requires me to go all the way from my village to the main city, which is 2 hours away, someone has to take care of my children and my home. Secondly, I don't know how much it will cost. And then I will have to stand in a long line. And I don't know if they'll even be able to accommodate me that way. Then, to get my results, I have to go there another day and collect my results. And I don't know if I can bring those results back to my primary health center and discuss it with my doctor here. Or, do I have to go back again multiple times to the hospital? So it just was so overwhelming, the process, that the family decided not to pursue screening. This is unfortunately a story that plays out again and again in multiple forms on a daily basis in our country. I can share one more story from, say, telecare, because telephone-based consultation in telecare has, especially through COVID and post-COVID, emerged as a major form of health-seeking behavior. I received a call from someone who had already done a mammogram in their city, but they wanted to talk to a family doctor, someone who could counsel, because there was something which had been found on the mammogram. A certain surgical procedure had been advised, but the family did not get the opportunity to discuss the pros and cons. And if at all that procedure they wanted to talk to someone who was fairly neutral, who was not the surgeon. In this case, someone reached out through teleconsultation. They lived in a different city. They shared their reports with me. I took a look at the report, and one of the questions I asked was, why was this test done? It opened up several very interesting concerns, which often are not straightforward and related to that particular cancer per se. I hope I've given you a flavor of what sometimes from a primary care physician's perspective and from a patient or family's perspective, cancer care in the pre-diagnosis phase can look like. And let's remember that each of the patients we spoke about are patients who were aware or who had been made aware. There are also very large segments of the population and providers, healthcare professionals, who may not be aware of what cancers to look out for, what screening modalities are available or advised, where these screening modalities are available or accessible to them, what engaging with the screening process entails, what the costs are, time costs, etc. And then what will happen in terms of follow-up and management or treatment should they be found to have a finding which is either suspicious or confirmatory of a cancer.
Right. And doctor, when it is diagnosed that they have a particular kind of cancer, then how does the referral system work? Is it different for different kinds of diseases or other non-communicable diseases, or how does it go?
So again, context can vary vastly in the same city with different providers, rural versus urban, one state versus the other, one country versus the other. So it's very variable. The ideal scenario is where there is a family doctor or a care team which acts as the single point of all contact, including coordination of care. And we've had those ideal scenarios many times. I'll give you an example. One of our patients was about 55. He called my colleague. This was 3 weeks back. And he said, I've been having headaches. And these headaches have been increasing in severity and frequency lately. And he said, I'm having some new onset memory loss. I went to the market. I knew why I went, but I just blanked out. I could not remember why I went. And I came back, and maybe my vision has changed. There was something in that story that my colleague, who's a family doctor, and me to discuss the case, and we decided that we should do a test or an MRI of the brain. When the brain MRI was done, a pituitary tumor was noted, which was actually causing these effects. Since we are family doctors, one of the things we did was we called up a surgeon, a neurosurgeon, close to that person, whom we also knew, discussed with the neurosurgeon, facilitated, explained all this to the patient so that the patient understood what was going on. Next day with the surgeon already had context, so the surgeon spoke with our patient, and because the surgeon, after speaking, would have called us back to update us as to what he was doing. And tumor was characterized by MRI. It was discussed. It was thought not to be malignant, but benign, but nonetheless having significant effects. And surgery was scheduled 3 days later. An operation was done. Tumor was coordinated between the surgeon and our family medicine team along with the patient. This, in many ways, is an ideal scenario. Doesn't always happen because family medicine per se is something which has become quite weak as a system in our country over the last 3-4 decades, and there is a significant need to strengthen family medicine and these kinds of doctors and teams who can serve as the specialists of patients and families and provide all these services. The more typical scenario is different services exist in kind of poorly interlinked silos. So someone, for example, is doing a screening camp. So often this happens in both urban areas and rural areas. Someone is doing a screening camp. The camp goes and screens hundreds of patients. If someone is found positive, there's really no relationship which can be leveraged to facilitate, connect patients to the right resource. So what may happen is, let's say some test comes back positive, they are told to go to a different facility, such as a cancer center in a big city. You please go to that center. But there is no one the family knows to go and approach. Many of our cancer centers are absolutely overwhelmed with the number of patients whom are very sick and at advanced stages of the disease. So, long lines and then follow-up is missed. So it's a very fragmented system overall. Again, you asked the comparison between certain infectious disease and non-communicable diseases. Any healthcare system can be viewed as a lattice. There are horizontal frameworks of organization, such as primary healthcare, and there are vertical programs. Vertical programs tend to have focused funding for, say, TB program or for NACO AIDS program. If someone falls within a certain vertical and at a certain site, if it's it's a program which is functioning quite well, many times those patients do receive many of these elements of follow-up in a timely manner, coordinated manner. But for whatever you don't have a national program, which is organized in this manner and where you can track the cascade of care, then you are reliant or you're dependent on a very fragmented primary healthcare system. So it plays out in very different ways in different contexts, sometimes reasonably all right, and many times resulting in inordinate delays, which significantly lead to poorer outcomes.
Doctor, as you talked about fragmented health systems and about how access is also a problem, then do you think that any kind of innovation in any way can help connect the dots and better the system?
Yes, I think innovations, taking a systems thinking lens here, innovations can happen in multiple fields and focal points. There can be innovations in the policy realm, there can be innovations in multiple realms. I will identify three, four. One innovation I'm a great fan of is a registry based screening system. For example, really a primary health center caters to a catchment area. And we've done it in a smaller way in our own practice. And, a registry is a core concept in many accreditation systems for primary healthcare. If, for example, I knew who all lived in my community and had a registry which allowed me to proactively identify people in need for screening interventions. If that registry also allowed me specific pieces of knowledge, like who is particularly at high risk, either because of lifestyle or factors related to certain types of exposure, such as say smoking or something else, or environmental factors. If we knew that in certain areas, people are prone to cancer of certain forms because of unique environmental exposures, or just age related or family history related. If someone has a strong family history of a certain type of cancer, this allows us to, this makes the system intelligent, where the system can say, in my catchment area of say 5,000 families, these 45 families or these 100 women or these 80 men are particularly at risk of development of cancer. While my system is available to everyone, it pays special attention to these who are at highest risk. That sometimes can enable an overwhelmed system in prioritization. This is an innovation, I think, which practice innovation, which I feel can have tremendous impact. The second is innovations in diagnostics, public health diagnostics, primary care diagnostics, cancer screening. There are multiple things which, can, where the locus of access can be moved from a large tertiary care hospital in a big city close to the patient's home. In fact, there are many home-based screening procedures which may be feasible. If not the home, at least the local sub-center or the primary health center. Innovations that move the locus of access from a distant tertiary care center closer to the community with very well laid out referral and coordinated referral systems will actually be game changer in my opinion. The third is integration of is not to view cancer as a medical specialty problem. You cannot view a large societal problem like cancer, the burden of cancer, as a medical specialty, subspecialty problem. You have to look at this as a large systems problem. You have to view this from the lens of how do you organize your health system, how do you organize primary care, and how do you interlink specialty services in oncology, definitely critical and very required, with the foundation of primary healthcare and the connection to palliative care. See, many times, by the time a person finds out they have cancer, they are already past a point where there is any great intervention possible. My own father-in-law, for example, who was a non-smoker throughout, he and who was in actually good health. I remember he started having cough and breathlessness, and after a delay of about of a couple of weeks, there was a chest X-ray, and it showed that he had lung cancer, which had already spread. So at that point, there is actually no great intervention possible. But one can definitely make that person comfortable and ensure that the dignity of that person is not compromised. So there's a critical need for palliative care. In our country, access to pain control access to physicians or nurses or healthcare providers with a palliative approach to care is sorely lacking. There are outstanding individuals and centers which do function, but at a society level, access for most people is very limited. Additionally, often we face this in practice. Even doctors with the expertise, experience to prescribe opioid pain medications like morphine don't actually have access to it. Supply chains. It's sometimes not just an issue of chain, but where to find it, what are restrictive policies that prevent people from using that in an appropriate manner, what are audit mechanisms that are not simply restrictive but also facilitatory of appropriate and timely use in the right person. These are all areas of in need of significant and immediate innovation and problems.
Doctor. And moving ahead, what would be a good scenario for India going forward in cancer, speaking from your perspective? And would this be again any different for other diseases such as other non communicable diseases or even infectious diseases?
Yeah, I think the time has come where across the world we need to move away from limited or selective primary care to integrated models of primary care which integrate all actors in a health system, including market forces and diagnostics, the whole entire system. I think in one line, I mean, the stronger our primary healthcare system is, and the more the design of the healthcare system takes into account the five, or these days I say the 8 C's of primary healthcare. That is, care should be available at first contact. It should be comprehensive. It should be contextual. It should be continuous. There has to be a relationship between primary healthcare teams and the community or individuals and families, and it should be coordinated. In addition, it should be available in the community, close to people's homes, and importantly, it must be a system that embraces complexity. One of the main points of disservice which happens sometimes to family medicine and primary healthcare is the perception of this is that it is simple and basic. It's anything but. And so complexity has to be embraced into the design process. And lastly, it must continually incorporate community voice. Each community has, when you live and work in a community, you realize that each community has certain priority needs and problems. Those priority needs and problems then will show hyper local variance. What is important to one particular community is not necessary. So allowing for customization and incorporation of community voice. I think if these principles are incorporated into the design and strengthening of a primary health system that integrates and connects well, we using these principles with the tertiary care infrastructure that we have built and successfully built in the last few years, with diagnostics, the diagnostics industry, with say digital information architecture that is emerging, and with processes of accreditation. We've seen, for example, in India, NABL has been a very successful model. It has certainly brought the overall benchmarks of quality at diagnostic labs significantly. NABH similarly has been a successful exercise. This needs to be brought into primary healthcare as well. And the Academy of Family Physicians of India, where I spend a lot of my work, is in the process of promoting and perhaps even launching accreditation an accreditation process to establish and promote benchmarks in primary care practices. I hope that answers your question.
So, thank you so much, Doctor. I just had a question on palliative care. So, is this integrated model of community health workers or model which connects tertiary hospitals to primary care hospitals? Is it that this integrated system would also be necessary for better access to palliative care in India?
Absolutely. But I don't think the answer lies in the tertiary care hospital system. So we've been working with we've been having some conversations with various stakeholders in Karnataka, including the government, where there is a need for community-based palliative care and a whole range of resources, like in terms of human resources. Many of these skills can actually be services can be led by physicians, but primary care, palliative care, any form of healthcare is team sport. You have to create teams, embolden teams, enlarge their capacity, entrust them, that's kind of how this works. So one of the models is a core set of clinical skills, assessment skills, interpersonal communication skills, and certain many times in palliative care, some of the medicines we use are over the counter. It doesn't require some special license. If these SOPs are put in place, and one of the models we are working on is how to increase community volunteers, not just volunteers, but community-based cadres, like say someone who is, say, an the ASHA worker cadre, similar to the ASHA worker cadre. If say a primary health center has one or two people focused on home-based primary care and home-based palliative care, who can make home visits, who are backed or supported by a team of physicians, nurses, clinical pharmacists, using the digital methods. Like there is a model called the ECHO model, which has been quite well studied over the last decade. The ECHO model is called Extension of Community Health Outcomes model. So these models what they can do is they can decongest the tertiary care center, make the utilization of tertiary care centers more appropriate. There are certain things which can only be done at tertiary care hospitals, and they must be done at tertiary care hospitals. But whatever can be done better in the community, closer to people's homes, using a whole set of actors, human resource actors, and other resources, which makes the health system more responsive to the needs of people. So definitely there have been several very interesting experiments and innovations done in several different parts of the world, including India, which I think the time is to kind of learn more about them, experiment with them, and scale them.
Yes, thank you so much, Doctor. Do you have any last thoughts?
I think perhaps a couple of things we might not have spoken about today is the role of things such as vaccines for cancer, like HPV vaccine. Can it prevent cancer? Also, newer ways of screening and diagnosis, etc. Perhaps the economics of health service programs and the design of these programs. But I'm sure these can be conversations for another day. And I look forward to reading a lot of the excellent work that your team is bringing out. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for your time. And this surely has been very enlightening. And we can surely have another podcast on some of these very important issues. So thank you for being with us today. Thank you for listening to the ICAR India podcast. Do follow our social media handles and stay tuned for the next episode.